Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have some stories for you from the Malicious Compliance subreddit. Before we start, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and you can always change your mind later. But if you stick around, my friend Carmen here just might have some cookies for you in the near future. Alright, on to the stories. Let's jump right in. This story comes to us from TSS Caramel. Upper management of the sports club fires me and cripples their kitchen. So I'm a professional chef and I have been for a few years. And in Australia, apprentice chefs are trained in a sort of college where we learn about 150 recipes. Now, many of the recipes are provided to the students in bulky, finicky booklets that you wouldn't really want to take anywhere with you. So I started writing some of the recipes in a separate notebook, along with some other recipes I learned from coworkers or family members, and created a sort of pseudo cookbook, and I would often bring this book into the kitchen, so I would remember ingredient quantities and cooking times, and eventually I would leave the book in the kitchen pretty much around the clock. What I soon found out was that some of the other chefs in the kitchen were using my cookbook to check official recipes for the restaurant we worked for, as typically the head chef would have to tell them, and this got annoying for everyone. And this restaurant was a part of a popular sports club in the local area, so consistency was extremely important to management. As such, having a written record of the new recipes or changes to longtime recipes was important. As it turned out, management had stopped making changes to the official club recipe book a few months before I even started. So my book became the de facto official recipe book. For a while, this was no issue to me, and I kept adding new recipes to it throughout the next few years. However, after my third year working there, I finished my studies and became fully qualified as a chef. So I suddenly became more expensive to keep on as staff member, and as such, management started looking for any reason to replace me with a new apprentice. Eventually, they found someone to replace me and gave a half-butt reason for firing me and told me to take all my things and leave as I could no longer offer what they were looking for. So I took everything I owned and left, including the notebook with all the club's recipes. For a few days, not a whole lot happened, but slowly the club's reviews started complaining about bland food, dry cakes, inconsistent classic recipes, and every other food-related thing you could think of. At one point, there was 50 negative reviews in a single day, which for our town was a massive amount of negative reviews in one day. It felt pretty darn good since I felt they deserved it and left me unemployed on a short notice. However, I was quickly offered a new job by a smaller restaurant whose owner knew me from the sport club kitchen. The Malicious Compliance. After about a week, I received multiple calls, and after answering one, I heard one of the higher managers at the sports club asking if I could return the book as the kitchen needed it back. I obviously laughed and said firmly that it was my book full of recipes, so it wasn't going anywhere near them, reminding them that they had told me I could no longer offer what they were looking for. The manager clearly began to panic as he offered to give me my job back and just let bygones be bygones. I already had a new job, so I completely brushed off this offer and ignored him. I hung up pretty soon after that. I started putting the recipes from my book on the new restaurant's menu, and it was beginning to attract a few regular customers of the sports club. So I quickly found myself with more and more responsibility and command within the kitchen, to the point that about a third of the menu was from my book. Now, this slow trickle of sports club regulars picked up speed after about 3 months, and led to several high-level managers from the club deciding to visit the restaurant I'd helped build, and virtually demanded I give them my cookbook, claiming it would be much more beneficial for the community if they had it. My head chef laughed in their faces and told them to piss off. It's been about 2 years and my head chef and I have a very positive relationship, and the customer base we have at the restaurant is better than ever. We didn't take every customer from the big club, but it was enough damage to their profits to scare a few investors away, and also led to a decent bit of damage to one of the higher managers' reputations. Furthermore, the recipe issues and negative reviews led to the majority of the kitchen quitting, and according to one of my old colleagues, they cited the lack of support and organization from upper management as the final reason everyone was quitting, and this led to an even larger dip in the quality of the restaurant food. I also get paid significantly more at this restaurant than I was at the sports club. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Zorby1. It says, "Just let bygones be bygones" means that in screwing you over, I screwed over myself worse. So forget what I did and save my butt. You just know if you'd taken your old job back, they'd copy the recipe book and find another excuse to get rid of you in a few months. So what's getting me on this one is that nobody was updating the official recipe book for that original restaurant. And this is one where apprentices are supposed to learn the trade? What? So everyone's getting their recipes from a notebook that's been written out by an apprentice. If that right there isn't a clear indication that this place is not run properly, I don't know what is. This story comes to us from Plogan56. "Don't like my cooking? Guess you don't need it." So my college friend Gina, who graduated 2 years prior to me, but we still keep in touch, told me about how she dealt with her disrespectful mother-in-law, Lana, who always had an opinion about how Gina did things. Gina and her husband live together in a house. It even has an office for her to work as a data analyst, but it's also close to Lana's house, who was widowed 5 years prior, meaning she got frequent visits from her where she would always comment on every little thing. From her cooking, cleaning, even job, she was of the belief that Gina's office was actually a game room and streaming setup due to the similar look, several monitors, I don't know. And at first, Gina let it slide for the first 2 months, but when her Lana wouldn't let up, she told her husband, Rick, to do something about his mother's comments. Now, I personally have met Rick twice, and from the get-go, he seemed like someone who doesn't like confrontation. So when she told us about how he hadn't done anything about his mom, we weren't surprised. Don't get me wrong, he's very nice and supportive. He just dragged his heels on telling his mother to stop sharing her opinion about Gina and her lifestyle. Here comes the malicious compliance. Gina decided to comply with Lana's request and told us how she did it. For the past several months, every time Lana would insult her cooking, cleaning, or job, she wouldn't do any of those things for her for 2 weeks. She said that it started small, with her saying that the baked chicken she made was so bland, despite already eating it. So Gina cooked for herself and Rick, but not for Lana, and didn't even give her a plate. When the 2 weeks were up and she finally cooked for her, Gina says she dug in like a wild dog into meat, but to me, that just shows she really did enjoy the food, she just wanted to be mean, shake my head. Gina says that she similarly did this for when she criticized her job, meaning she wouldn't buy her Lana anything when she asked, nor lend her money. Gina ended by telling us that Lana is much more behaved now, meaning she's not as openly opinionated as before and comes over to their home less often. Gina and Rick did have a fight or two over Gina's actions, which, to be frank, were spiteful, but if I'm honest, if Rick had just talked to his mom like Gina asked, this could have been avoided, but that's not my place to say. They talked it out, he apologized for his inaction, and right now, Gina says it's all stable for now. This was such a funny get-back story, I just had to share it with people. She followed her mother-in-law's orders, just not the way Lana wanted her to. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called SadComfort8692. It says, "But why is she buying her mother-in-law things or lending her money in the first place? She goes back to giving it to her 2 weeks later? Don't give money to people who disrespect you. Don't make food for people who disrespect you. Don't let people in your home when they repeatedly disrespect you. It's your spouse's job to tell their family to stop disrespecting you, or else they can go live with said disrespectful family." This story did not read like a win for me. Another user down below called Sever7 said, "Honestly, it's up to us to enforce our own boundaries. I like how the punishment fit the crime. Letting stuff slide is a recipe for disaster, because then they take you for a weak, spineless doormat." OP responded and said, "Yeah, this was such a passive-aggressive way of doing it too, considering Gina technically took Lana's criticism seriously. Also, when she described her like a starved dog, Let me know, Lana really was just being spiteful. I don't know if it was to feel superior or just because she didn't like her. I'm sorry, but if I've spent my time cooking something in my house for my mother-in-law and they tell me they don't like it and they're rude about it, I will never cook for them again. None of this 2-week bullcrap. I would never cook for them again. In fact, I don't think I'd ever even invite them over to the house if there was the slightest chance of a meal happening. Even if my spouse wanted to cook for their parents, I would very much so argue against it. This story comes to us from TB. Someone I barely knew was too lazy to ask me for a reference. Face the consequences. This happened a few years ago. I received a phone call from an HR person from a staffing agency I almost worked for at one point. That's another funny story for another day. I got through the greetings and small talk and got down to business. I have a person you know applying for a job with one of our customers. Sort of confused, no one ever gave me a heads up. Who are we talking about? Your friend Mo. Who? Mo last name. He said he worked with you at the email company. Oh, okay, I remember him. But I'm not sure why he'd put my name down. We didn't work at all that closely. I interacted with his team only peripherally because we had equipment in his office. I don't really feel comfortable providing a reference. Well, that's sort of our fault. We sort of pressured him to cough up references on the fly. I don't feel comfortable providing a reference. Come on, OP, we know each other. Help me out. Well, not being his manager, I can't discuss his performance. Okay, can I ask you about his technical skills and you comment those? Fine, ask away. How is Mo with software package number 1? Okay, I guess, maybe 2.5 out of 5? 5 out of 5 is extremely rare for this software. I might be 4.7, and I've used the software for 20 plus years, and even flown to the vendor's headquarters to work on technology issues and help design future versions of products with them. Great, how is he with hardware platform number 1? Well, in the time he was at the email company, he never touched the platform. If he gained knowledge from elsewhere, I can't comment. Wait, that can't be right. He said he led the hardware platform number 1 refresh project? Well, that's not true. Email company is huge. Is it possible you weren't aware of the project? No, I'm very aware of the project, and he wasn't leading it. How can you be so sure? Because I led that project. Oh. I think it's best for everyone we end the call here. I think you have a phone call to make. Yeah, that's probably best. I didn't necessarily bash him, but just set the record straight. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Elliot2030. It says, bizarre that he'd use you as a reference while claiming he did your job. But I guess you were the first person to come to mind since he stole your job, laugh out loud. Hey, OP, I just read this post of yours and I kind of feel like we know each other now. So I'm gonna put you down as a reference, okay? We're gonna say you were my boss at the Reddit company. Yeah, okay, let's do that. This story comes to us from Big Tater, the new fence. Recalling this story made my heart smile. A few years ago, I was building a new fence for a friend of mine. I had to remove the old sections that were falling apart first, of course, and when I got to the intersection of his back fence, his side fence, and the next door neighbor's back fence, I carefully separated the neighbor's fence from his, and proceeded to carry on removing the side sections that went between their two properties. My friend had told me that the side section was 100% on his property, and that the previous owner 30 plus years ago had deliberately given the next door neighbor's property an extra foot or so to ensure that he was building on his own property without calling for and paying for a survey. The neighbor, Susan, whom I will refer to as Karen for the remainder of this story, came running outside screaming at me that I couldn't remove the side fence and it was their property, and just what do I think I'm doing? I responded back very calmly that my friend had told them well in advance that he was going to replace the fence, that he was just going to build it in the same place as the old one, and asked if they were willing to split the cost, to which they declined, no biggie. Karen started screaming at me again, telling me I had no right to do that, and that my friend didn't give them proper notice, and that she didn't realize that there wouldn't be anything between their two properties to contain their dog. By now, I'm about ready to lose my crap, So I knocked on my friend's back door to let him know what was going on, and that he needed to talk to Karen, and that I was leaving because I didn't want to do or say anything I would regret, or cause problems with the neighbors for my friend. The entire project got put on hold pending a property survey that was going to cost $650 and that they demanded my friend pay half of, despite him telling them that the fence was definitely on his property and nothing was going to change with the new fence, and that he was fine with them continuing to have a foot or so of his property so that he didn't have to rock the boat. Fast forward to the following Monday when the surveyor comes out. Turns out the old side fence was not a little on my friend's property, but almost 10 feet onto his property, and the neighbors had built up raised flower beds and done a nice brick retaining wall right up along the fence line that they had spent a lot of money just in materials for, never mind the time they put in constructing it. Needless to say, my friend came away with the biggest crap-eating grin. For the mere price of $325, he was entitled to expand his yard of more than 30 years by about 800 square feet. And Karen and her husband, who happened to be the polar opposite of his wife in personality and was super nice, spent the next week moving their garden, retaining wall, and all of the dirt that was on my friend's property, so that I could build the fence on his side of the actual property line. They then hired the cheapest contractors they could find to slap up a fence on their side of the property line. They spent almost as much as my friend did on their new fence. I gave my friend the friends and family discount. 3 years later, the last 20 feet or so of their fence is on the ground already because it was such a crappy job that it fell over in a moderate windstorm this past spring. My friend's fence is still standing, rock solid, and his dogs are definitely making good use of the extra 800 square feet. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Basil Dream. It says, "I would love to have seen their faces when they got the news." OP responded to this one and said, "Oh, it was absolutely glorious. It looked like they had just tasted butt." Then Karen, of course, tried to save face and was like, "Good, I'm glad we got this worked out and everybody has their correct amount of property now." Wait, did Karen actually take the L at the end of this story? When does that ever happen? Normally the Karen would still be up in arms, but apparently not in this case. Karen just walked away with their tail between their legs. Kinda something new that we don't get here very often. This story comes to us from Happy Scattered Reader. Tell us the right time. For many years, my family would take trips with other family members. All of these trips had one thing in common: my aunt, uncle, and cousins would be late for everything. This used to really irritate my parents, who are pretty punctual, and a lot more kids to organize, 4 of us, compared to my 2 cousins. By mutual agreement, any other family involved in these outings decided to go along with my parents and give aunt and uncle the wrong time. For example, if an event started at 11 a.m., they'd be told 10 a.m. This was pretty effective, until aunt and uncle started realizing they were being given the wrong time. I believe other family members explained why that was, and that they were fed up with always waiting on them or being late. Self-awareness not being very apparent that they were the issue, it was decided by them that it wasn't their fault, and they told my parents, "Give us the right time from now on and you'll see, we aren't the problem." My parents, especially my mom, hates the idea of people missing out on something, but is also prepared to let a natural consequence occur if it's not too harsh. The very next week, we had a day trip booked on the ferry. This was something we did once a year, over to the UK and back in one day, fondly known as a booze cruise back in the day due to the opportunity to purchase cheap alcohol. Kids would explore the ship and when we docked, raid the pick and mix in Woolworths and buy confection that we couldn't get at home. It was something everyone looked forward to a lot. What can I say, it was the early 90s. With the best will in the world, the ferry waits for no man. So it was a sad day for 4 people who were told the ferry left at 8 a.m. sharp, the correct time, and who arrived after 8:30 to see a small ferry-shaped speck in the distance heading toward the UK. Sadly, it didn't make them any more punctual after that, but they were always told the correct time as requested, and if they were late, we didn't wait anymore. For months, whenever we'd see them after that, my parents used to cheerily wave and say, "Very nice to see you." Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Pia Virtue. It says, "Once people prove they are chronically late for everything, no one should feel they have to wait. If you tell people to arrive at 1 for a dinner at 2, then you should have dinner on the table and people sitting down by 2:01. If somebody isn't there, leave the door unlocked so they can let themselves in. Every holiday I don't work, I do just that." We can't spend our whole lives waiting on other people, especially if the expectation has already been set that you're going to continue on without them if they are not there on time. OP, you and your family have done exactly what you needed to do. If your aunt and uncle can't take it upon themselves to be somewhere on time, that's completely on them, and they deserve to miss out on whatever was happening. This story comes to us from Hot Cryptographer 552, a six-pack by any other name. I was in the army way back when the internet was new, and computer illiterate commanding officers had their clerks print out emails so they could read them. As a young private after work, me and my buddies would often stop by the Class 6 store on post, an army liquor store, to buy beer after we got off duty. One day, me and my buddy grabbed a 12-pack of beers on the way to the barracks. When we got to the barracks, we had to pass the CQ, charge of quarters, basically a guard posted at the entrance to the barracks. The CQ that day was a specialist, E4, who I really didn't get along with. He was mad he had to pull CQ duty, and he was always trying to find everyone stupid infractions. He had taken a special interest in me for some reason. The CQ told us we could only bring 6 beers into the barracks. Since he was an E4 and outranked myself E2 and my friend E3, I was very respectful when I asked him what he meant. He pulled out a 3-ring binder with the barracks SOP, standard operating procedure, and pointed to the section that said a soldier could only bring 6 beers into the barracks. Interesting. I thought about handing my friend 6 beers and taking 6 myself to get around this stupid rule, but this guy would log that we opened the 12-pack of beer outdoors in the logbook and we'd get in trouble anyway. But then I had an interesting idea. I thanked the CQ and told my friend to come on. We walked back to Class 6 and got a refund on the beer. Then we bought 6 40-ounce bottles of malt liquor. We went from 144 fluid ounces of beer with 12 12-ounce cans to 240 fluid ounces of malt liquor in 6 40-ounce bottles. When we returned to the barracks, the CQ wanted to inspect our package. He just about hit the ceiling when he saw I was carrying 6 40-ounce bottles. "I told you you can only bring 6 beers into the barracks." "There are 6 beers in here. I can count them off if you like." I then proceeded to count them before he could respond. Flustered, he allowed us to proceed. The next morning, the first sergeant, highest-ranking non-commissioned officer in the company, called me to his office. He yelled at me for about 5 full minutes before he calmed down long enough to tell me I was getting an Article 15, non-judicial punishment, roughly the military equivalent of a plea bargain. Why? Because I violated his SOP by bringing 6 40-ounce beers into his barracks. That was when I heard the CO, commanding officer, a captain in the next office over, call for the first sergeant. First sergeant jumped up and went straight to the CO's office. I strained to hear them talking for a few minutes. From what I could make out, they were reviewing the SOP and comparing to the CQ log. But their voices got louder as they started expressing different views, and I could hear that part clearly. "But it says clearly you can have a 6-pack of beers." "First sergeant, it says you can have 6 beers. But it's obvious it means 6 cans of beer." "No, first sergeant, it's not obvious. Send that soldier back to work. We're done here." A couple seconds later, I could feel the sheer anger as First Sergeant stormed back into his office and bellowed, "Get the F out of here." So I did. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called MJerix. It says, "Your CO is a man I'd run through fire for. No questions asked. Provided he was fair and consistent in all aspects of decision making." OP responded and said he was the cooling saucer for Top's hot tea. Another thing to think about here is that the Article 15 won't go through unless the CO signs off on it, and it sounds like that's not happening in this case. So OP got away with it, but you have to wonder just how much trouble this guy's gonna make for OP in the future because of the way that OP just got him dressed down.